Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Veronica Roberts, the John and Jill Freedom Rich Director here at the Cantor. And this is such a wonderful evening to celebrate Jeremy Frey Woven. I feel like it's the last day or so he's been here meeting with students and catching up with old friends, and it feels like it's been an artist wedding of sorts. Raise your hand if you've known Jeremy for more than just today. Yeah, like half the room. Like this guy has like friends that friends and family that come from near and far. And I think that says a lot about him. I also wanted to mention that there is a gorgeous catalog for this show. You can't have my copy, but you can buy one for yourself. This one is alarmed. If you try to take it, it will make a lot of noise. But we have those just behind the front desk. And I'm telling you, this is a hot commodity. When I first became obsessed with Jeremy's work, I called the museum gift shop because I hate purchasing from Amazon. And they were like, we're out of stock. The Portland Museum had none left. I'm like, the show only opened 3 weeks ago. They're like, yeah, we have none left. So I did order from Amazon, but you don't have to do that. You can buy it from us. All right, so now to Jeremy Frey. I wanted to start this introduction 13,000 years ago. Don't worry, I promise we won't be here all night. But 13,000 years ago is how long Wabanaki baskets have been around, according to archaeological and tribal records. Wabanaki baskets, for those who are not familiar, those who didn't raise their hand and don't know all of this already, they are the oldest continuously produced art form in Maine, made since long before Maine was established as a state or called such. Pretty remarkable, 13,000 years. Okay. I said I wasn't going to take all night, so I'm going to fast forward to 1993. The major Indian markets in Santa Fe and Arizona barely are including any baskets. Wabanaki weavers in Maine are selling baskets for, what would you imagine, Jeremy, like 50 bucks? Oh, that's an expensive one. Okay, so let's say 30 bucks. That sound about right? So the tradition is on life support. People can't, the amount of time and labor that people are investing in, they can't spend the kind of time and labor because they're not able to make a living and able to sell them for much. So now this is where we enter, not Jeremy Frey, he's still a teenager. This is where we enter Teresa Secord, an accomplished Penobscot weaver, part of one of the Wabanaki tribe members and elders. I don't know if she minds being called an elder. I hope that's okay. She's not that old. But she was the founding director of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, which she founded in 1993 when she saw what was happening around her. And she was one of the founders and wanted to save what she saw as an endangered art form and help introduce it to the next generation. And they offered, so MEBA, I think that's the acronym, we love acronyms. They offered workshops, apprenticeships, and also engaged in intensive marketing efforts. And it's a couple more years before I think you join take your first class, and you started weaving around 2000, you're weaving with her, and I know you learned from your mother, but a gal Frey, but Teresa I know was also an important mentor to you. But as Teresa puts it, she could immediately see Jeremy's talent, and she said, we were making our grandparents' baskets when Jeremy came along, and he did something new and something different. And if you haven't seen the show, I don't want to give it all away, but they really vibrate and pulsate, and they feel full of life. They feel like they have a spirit, in part because of the palette. He's an incredible colorist. Just like if you want your mind blown by color relationships, just head upstairs. But there's also something about the contours of the baskets. There's sea urchins, which I'm obsessed with, and others are too. But some of them have the they're satisfying in this way that I find like the swelling hips of Cycladic figures, or like the most beautiful ancient Greek amphora that you've ever seen in your life. That's where Jeremy's at. So now we're going to fast forward to 2010. I haven't kept track of what age you are at this point, but you're no longer a teenager. Jeremy wins the U.S. Artist Fellowship. Oh, I do know what age you are. Sorry, that's in my notes. You're age 32. At age 32, he was the youngest artist to receive the prize at the time. Big deal. 32, baby. And then 1 year later, I promise we won't go through every year. I'm going to fast forward very soon. But in 2011, one of Jeremy's baskets, which is in the show, won the top prize for the entire Santa Fe Indian market. And that market had been around for nearly 100 years. This was the first time in the fair's history that a basket had ever earned the top prize. He sold the basket at that fair for $15,000. That was also the highest price a Maine Indian basket had ever commanded, certainly more than $30. Good work. And I think that, but I say that somewhat humorously, but really Jeremy wasn't just writing himself into art history. He was also lifting up an undervalued market, an entire genre and form of human expression that had been around for thousands of years, since millennia, and paving the way for so many other artists. Mark Basir, the director of the Portland Museum, was telling me over lunch today that in fact the Maine Indian Basket Maker Alliance has been a model for California, and there's one that sort of has used a lot of the taken its cues from MIBA. That's incredible. So I'll stop. The accolades keep going. Every year there's another accomplishment. I'm going to skip the rest of it. We're just going to come to now, where we are in this room. But I did want to just reflect for a moment before I turn it over to Ramey Mize, the curator of the show, on time, because I started 13,000 years ago, but we also have to think about the life cycle of the trees that Jeremy's weaving with. And one of the things that's so remarkable about them is that he's weaving with the growth rings of the tree. And most baskets are not made that way. In fact, I think virtually very few are. So there's something really beautiful about weaving with the life cycle of a tree. And I also, when I think about time, I think about the time you want to spend with those baskets. Some of the people in this room have lived with them and spent months looking at them. Just today, I certainly haven't done that as much as I want to steal one and take one home. I don't live with any of them, but I live not far from this, the second floor galleries. And I've spent a lot of hours with these baskets. And every time I look at them, there's something new that I hadn't seen before. And I just think that these baskets are slowing us down. They're the kinds of works you just want to park yourself in front of. So I was joking with Jeremy today that the metrics that we judge shows on like attendance, we should have a new one, which is nose prints on the glass in front of that amazing work, Caesura. Like, how many nose prints do we have to wipe off during the run of the show? And then the other one is the audible gasps that I want to record in the gallery. So maybe I'll like plant a little recorder and we'll count the number of times people gasp. Usually it happens, pro tip, it happens when you look inside the basket. There's some surprises. So I just want to say, by those criteria, even though it's early in the show, of gasping in galleries and nose prints, I think you definitely are best in show and in a league of your own, Jeremy. So we're so honored to have you here, so honored to have the work here, and so honored to have Ramey here in conversation. This is the final stop on your tour. The band is going to, have to do something else soon, but Ramey curated this exhibition for the Portland Museum in Maine, and we're so thrilled to have her. She's been working closely with Jeremy. The show traveled to Chicago and then on to the Bruce in Connecticut. And we are the final stop. And thank you for taking us out with a bang. So I'm going to just invite you up to the stage, and thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So I'm Jeremy Frey. This year I was a recipient, what was last year, of the MacArthur Award, which was a huge shock. That's one of the newest things. And it was for basketry, and a craft from a woodland tribe got the MacArthur. And I never could have imagined that when I started weaving. I started weaving mainly to keep my hands busy and to stay sober originally. That was the plan. And then I just really started to enjoy it, the meditation of it, the creativity. And then I started to explore, where it could go. I mean, it's such an old form of art. And in one way I was lucky, because where it was dying off, the pieces, a lot of the masters were gone. And because of that, people were being taught by people who were still learning. And so it was sort of a less intricate time. And so I could see the possibilities of the craft, but I sort of had to make it up on my own. And so that's what I did. I initially would, there was this one show in Bar Harbor every July that I would go to, and I would try and bring something that no one had ever seen before. And that was the plan. Every year I would attend this show and bring something no one had ever seen before. And in the first few years, I would dream about it. I would constantly think about all these things. And I remember thinking back, and I think I had about 80% of every design I've ever made, I had in my head the first year. But it took years and years and years to get to the point where I could produce them. And there are some pieces that I had ideas then that I still haven't made. And some pieces that maybe I can never make, just mechanically, physically, that the material won't do that, or, you know, but it's funny, you know, weaving it in its essence is a very basic and simple thing. It's the tension of two pieces kind of fighting against each other, and that fight holds them in place. And so, you know, it's over, under, left to right. That whole thing is like, well, how do you take something that's so binary and so basic and make it complex, or make it different, or and I've approached innovating basketry in many different ways over the years, and for different motivations. Originally I wanted it to not be craft. So I said, I'm going to make it art. And that was a younger me for sure. So I would try and make non-functional baskets, or make porcupine quill paintings that were on the baskets. That's free-form art, even though it was still made in a craft style. And I can't, you know, I'm sure were other approaches. I mean, I've worked with form, color, material design. And it helped me push forward what I was doing. But I finally just realized that the argument I was having with myself over craft and art was sort of pointless. I'm glad I had it, because it pushed me to do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. But at this point, I kind of feel like it's irrelevant. I mean, no, so the show kind of came together in a funny way. I was at Santa Fe Indian Market, and I was speaking with Jamie DeSimone, who is another curator that helped with the show. And I was talking about the emerald ash borer, which is it's a bug that's killing our trees, and how it was going to eventually stop me from doing something that I was trying to perfect for, at the time, 20 years, and how sad that was. And I've always done arts. I mean, basketry is just the thing that I finally took to and pushed. But I said, I'd like to diversify and branch out, so that eventually, if I can't make baskets, I can still do arts. And so I said, one of the things that I always thought was really difficult to do for any artist is art video. It can go so wrong so easily. So I described a video to her, and I said, we were just sitting down at lunch, and I said, can you take this back with you and talk to other people in the art world, and just kind of get a sense of if they think that's something that could work. And so she did. She left, and a couple weeks later, she gets a hold of me. She said, "Look, I mentioned the video, and people loved it, and but here's the thing: we'd like to offer you a show and fund the production of that video." I was excited because I had always thought. I mean, I've been in group shows. My work had been around. At that point, I had been doing basketry for a long time, and I had traveled around the country and won awards. And I knew someday I wanted to have a solo art show. But I was always like, it would take so long to make those. It would take like 20 years to make those baskets for any show that size. And so I was like, I don't know. And then I started thinking about it. I said, I've been making baskets for 20 years. And then I started thinking about where these baskets were and which ones they were. And I said, there is a show. There's a show. And yeah, so we did the show. We look for baskets. We photograph baskets. Yeah, and we found more baskets than we could use. We had to turn some down, many down, and everyone we asked, I would say everyone we asked was thrilled to lend them. And the magical part really is what's going on here today. This stop wasn't on the show. And so people had already committed these works out for a year and a half, 2 years, and they're asked to keep them out even longer. And everybody was thrilled to do it. And that's amazing to me. Because I know I wouldn't want to part with something like that. I mean, there's an energetic investment. There's the beauty of it. It's a financial investment. And there's just the connection to the work. I rarely do people that collect my work choose to sell it or even let it out of their house. So, which I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's my intro.
What an intro. Seriously. Jeremy Frey. Thanks so much for that, Jeremy. And thank you, Veronica, for such an incredible, generous, thoughtful introduction. I'm Ramey Mize. I am one of the co-curators on this project. Any exhibition is the product of so many hands, so many minds, and generous hearts to make something possible. So I really appreciate what you said, Jeremy. We have some incredible lenders in the audience today. And it takes a village, it's a real group effort. And like Jeremy mentioned, we dreamed of having a West Coast venue because in reality, your career really launched out West. And I wonder if maybe you can kind of share some of that experience just from your own perspective that Veronica alluded to of, when you came first to the Santa Fe Indian market as a young artist with the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance in 2009, and then you returned to win it all in 2011 with your first submission to the juried market. And, for those who might not know, the Santa Fe Indian Market is the largest juried Indigenous arts market in the world and an incredibly prestigious venue for Native artists of all types of media and backgrounds. And, Jeremy was this young kind of unknown who just burst onto the scene and won Best in Show, for the first time for basketry, like Veronica was mentioning. So I wonder if you can maybe share like what that sort of generative, formative moment was for you and what it meant for your career past that point.
Yeah. So the very first time I went to Indian Market, Miba was invited as a demonstrator, and Teresa, who was running Miba and who is my mentor, had been telling me, you need to go to Indian Market. You need to go to Indian Market. And I was like, well, there's like 1,000 artists. It's all over town. It just seems really difficult to even figure out where to go, what to do, who to talk to, how to set up a table. How are you going to travel out there with a booth on the plane? And so she's like, well, we're going to do a demo booth and we're inviting 4 artists. You're one of them. You're going. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm preparing. She's like, you can sell there, but it's a demo booth. So you'll be demonstrating as well. So I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, so I'm in Indian Market. And I knew that they competed. So I took and I designed the most complex piece I could possibly think of to enter at this show I'd never been to against artists. I didn't know their caliber. I didn't know anything. So I show up there. We get set up in the booth area. We're just, we're meeting people, going around town. I go over to enter my work. And they're like, yeah, you're not in the show. I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you're not juried in. I was like, well, but I'm in the show. Yeah, but you're a demo booth. You didn't get juried in. You can't enter. I said, well, this is a competition. So can I just enter? And if I'm not juried in, I won't win. So that's fine, right? They wouldn't let me do it anyway. I guess there's some rules or something. I don't know. So I still love that piece. We couldn't get it for the show. I couldn't get a hold of the owner, but yeah, the next year I came back and I won. So that's It was cool. The piece that I won with, actually, I don't think was as strong as the piece I wanted to enter with the year before. Actually, it's a funny story. The piece that I won with, I had made a piece to enter, and a guy from New York shows up out of nowhere in the middle of Maine. Just he walks in. We're renovating the gallery space that I was working on. There was a hole in the bathroom, and I just remember he used the bathroom, and I was like, this fancy New York guy was in there, and I just didn't want him to fall through the floor. But he's like, do you have any baskets? I said, well, I have this one, but I'm making it to enter. He's like, well, do you want to sell it or do you want to enter? And I said, well, I want to sell it. He's like, then just sell it to me. So I sold it to him. This is 2 weeks before Indian Market. So I had to make the piece that won in 2 weeks, and it's a big piece. I don't even know if Ari knows that story. So, so it's similar to the piece, but I didn't want to make a piece that was exactly the same. So I changed the top and I did some changes. And then I went in and entered it. And then you get the preview call if you win, but you don't know what you win. You win the category, and then the categories go against for best in show. And when I walked in to the preview, it was front and center with all the lights on it. They don't tell you, but it was kind of obvious. And I was being optimistic. But no, I won. And the collector that ended up buying it made his wife sit in the rain all night to get it in a thunderstorm at 7 months pregnant. I'm kidding. Mostly. No, but so when I won that, you get on the front page of these papers, and this is coming from Maine, where I had sold at decent prices. I was building a market. I had a following, and this was after I had already premiered many designs in Maine. So it was just like this new level. Everybody knew who I was in a new place. And another thing is I'm not full native, and out there everybody's so dark and they're just from like right out of the pueblos, so it was a nice way to be fully embraced by the community. And if I'm gonna be completely honest, I was intimidated at going because Maine natives, I mean, we're up in the woods, so we're not dark anyway. And then so anyway, so it was like this instant transition into this community where, and it was such an obvious way to get in that it was like everybody, I mean, it wasn't any question, and after that, I loved it. I would try to win every year. And one of the things I would notice, I never did win again, but one of the things I would notice is that competition was creating native contemporary art. And I think originally it would have been a very traditional, I think if you go back in time and you really look, it was probably a lot of traditional arts winning in a native show generally, but there was this transition that started, and I got to be a part of that and watch all of these young contemporary artists compete against each other for this award. And it's created so much, there's so much buzz in the native art world right now, and it's still overlooked heavily, but there are some amazing artists there. There's inspiring energy there. I would go there, I would come home. I wouldn't really get inspired by other people's designs. It was more the energy of the place and just all of the art that was going on. And just, I would come home with a ton of new ideas from my work specifically, and it would always energize me every year. And I really miss that energy, but I don't go anymore.
Well, I thank you so much for recounting that incredible formative foundation for kind of bringing your work to the next level. But in many ways, like you said, you were doing that in Maine, and you just had an audience that could really recognize it and value it out in Santa Fe. And I think also, if anyone has seen Jeremy's work, you are instantly struck by his technical virtuosity, his precision, the intricacy of this art form, and just the rigor that you bring to it. And I wonder if maybe, for audiences who are kind of learning about this practice and your practice, if you could share a little bit about how you were pushing this art form that obviously has such deep roots in your community, but I'm thinking of something like the fine weave, something which you really revived and kind of advanced to unknown heights. and other innovations that you made in different weaving techniques, from the get-go, and what that process was like for you.
So originally, when I started, the most expensive piece that I ever heard of selling was like $200. And if you're only getting $200 for a basket, you can only put so much time into it. I mean, you can't spend 3 weeks to make $200. It just doesn't work. So that reflected in production. So like people would make these beautiful baskets, but they wouldn't weave the bottoms because you don't see the bottoms. They didn't really worry about the inside of the basket because you only see the outside when it's closed. And generally they're art pieces, so you can use them, but they generally sit on a shelf and look beautiful. But early on, I thought, I'm going to weave the bottoms, like right to the center. And then eventually I said, well, I'm going to weave them smaller. And then I'm going to weave them smaller. And then I had some gauge maker make me the smallest gauge he possibly could. And I'm going to weave them out of that. And I did that for a while. I said, I'm just going to keep weaving. I'm not going to do the sides. I'm just going to make the whole thing small. So I took the bottom. Instead of changing it to a larger weave and making patterns, I just kept weaving that tiny weave all the way up. That first piece is actually in the show, and you have to look around for it, but it's a little white basket. And there's another one next to it. They're different shapes, and they have, they're different qualities, but they're both made in the same technique on the same form. The only difference is I learned how to do the fine weave between the two. So they're supposed to be the exact same shape. But the early one was so experimental. It was the first of its kind. And that was my very first innovation in basketry. And one of the elders came up to me once and they said, why are you doing that? I said, you're just wasting your time. And I said, well, I've got a plan. And it didn't, I said, I'll figure it out. And it always stuck with me because I was innovating and I was really excited about it. And I thought it was a really negative thing to say. And I didn't really say anything back. I never forgot it, Then I kept innovating and figured it out. And then one day the same elder came up to me and she's like, hey, I want to get a basket for my granddaughter and I want one of your fine weaves. And so I think that might have just been an apology, but either way, it worked. So, and she was a master weaver, had been doing it her whole life. Her whole family makes baskets. So just for her to buy a piece from me at all, and at that point, my prices were a little bit more expensive than your average weaver. So she spent some decent money on it. And I always remember that. That was kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the fine weaves illustrate just your deep ecological knowledge of the ash tree, your primary material that you work with, and how much you're able to really push that material to these incredible levels of finesse. And just for the audience to say, a fine weave is down to 1/16 or 1/32 of an inch. So we're talking about thread-like wood that Jeremy was able to innovate to be able to braid. So braided wood. And I wonder if
that was
share, yeah.
So that was another innovation. So the fine weave is where it all started. And I never went back. All the bottoms of my baskets are made in fine weave. And there are still people who don't weave the bottoms of their baskets even today. And then
in that massive scale, I'll say.
Yeah. So after that, I don't know what the next innovation really was. I guess the next major one was braiding the ash. I remember I went to that same show that I premiered the work at, and I brought this basket. It was about 6 inches. It took me about a month to make, and I braided hardwood. So if you think about that, I don't know if any of you work with wood, but you can't braid hardwood. It snaps. But ash is this special material. So I get to this show. It has about 60 basket weavers who that's what they do. They make baskets. And people started talking. They're like, he's got this braided ash basket over there. So the collectors were coming by, but also the weavers were coming by. They're like, what's a braided what? And then they'd look at it, and it was such a tiny braid that you really couldn't even see it. They're like, where's the braided basket? I'm like, it's right in front of you. And so they'd look at it, and it just had this little, it really, I mean, as far as making a basket, it was completely unnecessary. But as far as pushing it forward and seeing what you could do and innovating, it was this pivotal moment for me. And I remember, I think for a month's work, I sold the basket for $1,000, which was huge at the time. And I told the people, I said, I'll probably never make one of those again. And I've seen them 10 times since. And every time they're like, have you ever made one of those again? So, yeah, they're making sure I don't. And then after that, I started working with porcupine quills and doing imagery on the baskets. That was another innovation I did. And then I started playing with form. I bought a really, really cheap lathe and I started turning wood, but it would flop all over the place. But I got a few. I brought back an old style of basket called the urchin basket, which is up there. I've made that my own. It's a very difficult shape to weave. I'm not going to get into why, but it is. It took me years before I would even attempt to make one. And it's a very elegant shape, and it's probably been one of my biggest selling baskets over the years. It's probably one of the most popular. And then eventually I ended up getting some grants and getting professional tools and making vase shapes of all sorts and sizes and really exploring form. And I'm still exploring form. I still make new forms every year. But there was a day where I just had an image of like a set of nesting baskets, but they were just one basket. And I said, well, how can I make a basket that has a bunch of tops, but that doesn't look overworked or doesn't look awkward or doesn't look, bizarre. So I made a really awkward, bizarre basket. But it wasn't about, that one wasn't about form. That was about technique and about explore. And that's up there. Actually, it's a flat, wide piece with just all kinds of tops and bottoms. It just looks like it's kind of blown up into a bunch of pieces. But the idea was to see, it was exploring, multiple, like having one vessel look like it's multiple vessels and finding different ways to attach the material and different ways to fold it back. And I was just playing with the material at that point. But that's grown into, whether it's a double wall basket or a multiple top basket or just baskets with woven necks around, that's all stems from that one piece, which you can see that in the show. It is a heavy presence of multiple weavings in the show. In fact, when I was looking around today, I probably over half of them have different versions of that exploration in them. And they all look completely different depending on how they're treated color-wise or what the weave ends up looking like or where they're placed on the basket. And I'm sure there's all kinds of other small innovations that I'm just not even thinking about because I'm always trying to change things.
I think that's what makes you so great, is that you're always pushing yourself, but you're also never forgetting who you are and where you come from. And that kind of holding of multiple timescales is something that this exhibition really reflects. And it was something that we wanted to help viewers and audiences embark on that journey with us. Jeremy's journey of innovation and advancement in this art form, and wanting people to kind of pay attention and see, notice that continuity and then those shifts and those evolutions that you're making. And I'm just hearing you talk right now about basket within basket, that kind of original, like, experimental attempt with that idea in mind. I'm wondering, is that actually tied to Caesura, the amazing optical illusion piece? Was there some kind of genealogy there that led you to that piece? Or can you just share how you kind of arrived at that amazing breakthrough?
So Caesura actually came from the paper prints. There's some embossed prints up there, and this we didn't have as much room here, so there's a few, but the show was heavier with them originally. They're woven panels that were inked and embossed into paper, and they have a really good energy to them. But I wanted to find a way to really bring them into the basketry. So I said, well, what if I wove something that sort of almost from a distance looked like a print or some sort of a two-dimensional image, but it wasn't. And it's this sculpture in the wall. And so I put that together. And yeah, I think it worked as planned, and it's actually been at every venue, and everybody puts holes in their walls, and so impractical. So I've always wanted to push forward, but there's always been this practicality side. Like, you're making baskets and you're making them for people to put in their homes, so they have to be practical. And I mean, you shouldn't have to put a hole in the wall. But if you're doing a show of art, I mean, I've been to art shows and there's some crazy impractical stuff in those. So I was like, we could do this. So I had to convince her first. Mark, I said, Mark, can we put a hole in the wall? He said, yeah.
Characters.
And I had to do it. They had no idea what I was talking about. I tried drawing pictures. They're like, yeah, that's scribbles. I don't. And so, and it started to take form, and I was able to actually send images that looked like something. And like, oh, well, that sort of makes sense. And then we finally had it framed, and yeah, I think it worked really well. And every placement at every show has worked really well. I mean, today someone was like, how do you make it look like it goes into the wall like that? I said, it's a trick. So, it still fools people. And then the nose prints, that's because people are trying to figure out if it actually has depth to it. And it's obvious, but they won't let their minds believe that there's a hole in the wall. So that's kind of cool. But along with innovation, I just remembered, I love the insides of my baskets, but no one ever gets to see them. Because when you weave a basket, when I weave a basket, I do half the ribs, and then I put the second half on later, and it creates this really cool spiral on the inside that stacks. And then that spiral is always on the inside. And so I thought, well, how can I present that? And present it in a different way where it makes a lot of sense. So you get to see this internal basket structure. Maybe it wouldn't even have to be a basket. So I started making these flat panels. It's basically the inside of the basket with some outside weave incorporated. And then I frame those, and those are wall mounted pieces, which gives you, if you don't have space, it was a different way of displaying the work and seeing it at a different light. It's like a deconstructed piece. And so those have been really fun to play with. And then when you get into that, now you're working with these flat weaves on the wall. Well, then you can say, well, I'm going to try making a flat weave, but not relating it to those flat weaves. And so then that's a whole other journey I'm on. And that's still new, but it's fun. And that all started from making those prints. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which funny, when I was making the prints, I had to take that spiral off because it wouldn't fit through the press. What are you going to do?
Well, since you're mentioning the prints, Jeremy, do you want to kind of share, because that's such a, as you mentioned, the exhibition really offered this kind of fertile ground for you to really push the boundaries and directions of your practice in ways that you wouldn't have in other contexts, right? And so the printmaking was definitely one of those avenues to, go down. And, I wonder if you could just describe for folks how you made those, because that was, another amazing moment of experimentation and collaboration.
Yeah, the prints were... So I knew I was going to go work with a print studio. I've never been to a print studio. And I was like, okay, so I don't even know what a press really looks like. I mean, I had an idea. So I was like, okay, I have to make plates. That was my thought. I'm going to make plates that we run through a press. So they have to be roughly the same thickness. And I had to think of how they would look on paper. So I did a few different designs. Yeah, I got there, and it was an experience. We made some really cool prints, but I think I really walked away with the idea. I had a much more of a sense of what the process was and different ways of laying them out. And I think the next print series will have a lot. I mean, now that I know exactly what I'm walking into, I can weave a much more conducive to the project sort of plate. So. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it was basically like these flat weaves that were effectively monoprints, inking up the ash, basically the bottom of a basket, spiraling out and running, pressing that to paper and running that through the press and, carrying the grain and the kind of signature of the wood. And, it was just almost like a portrait of that material in a new way.
So the 6 plate, it was about 6 plates. And the thing is, I wanted more than 6 colors. So I had to think about, okay, once you ink wood, it's soaked into the grain. So how do I make more colors with 6 plates? You can't clean them like you would a normal printer. So we ended up, I would start, I would just go, I would say, all right, if I'm going to do a yellow, that'll turn to orange and that can go to red. So we can just blend through that one. If we're going to go with blue, that can be purple. So I had to decide the whole run of the print colors based on knowing that whatever was below was going to bleed into the next color. So you plan that ahead of time. That was kind of an interesting one. I think my biggest shock was because we were using all of these handmade, crazy, awesome papers, and I was like, I want to do it in black and have something like silver or gold over the front. And then, so we went out and picked up some. Just it wasn't this exotic, crazy handmade. It was quality paper, but it seemed odd to go from these handmade ancient papers to just like a factory bought decent quality print paper. But those ended up being my favorite ones. Just that the reverse. And you mentioned something too. When you look at a basket and you see the wood, the color is fully saturated and it looks beautiful. But when you look at the prints, you see the grain. It looks more photorealistic than the actual basket because the grain gets embossed into it in a way that only the high points get embossed in. So you see way more grain in the prints than you do in the actual dyed baskets, which was an interesting side effect. Yeah.
And it was really cool to see how the ash behaved under those circumstances because it's an incredibly strong material and it could withstand that unbelievable pressure of the press.
For a while.
For a while, I mean, before they broke down, yeah. And I wonder, Jeremy, if you can just talk to us again, that connection that you have to this material, this tree, looking at these vessels and remembering that they began as trees. If you could share with the audience how you go about harvesting this material. I want to just emphasize Jeremy's incredibly special for the fact that he harvests all of his own materials. He's building his own forms. I mean, he is operating at every single level of this process, which is quite rare and unique. And so I wonder if you could kind of share that aspect of things and how you're relating to these materials and, amassing them.
Yeah. So, when I first started weaving, I was just getting material from my mother, who got it from someone who harvested material. And I remember we got our first brown ash tree delivered. It was horrible, and I pounded it apart, but it wasn't even usable. So I was like, I need to go get some ash. So I knew what an ash tree looked like. And my uncle had harvested with my grandfather. So he was a master harvester, and I was like, hey, let's go. He's like, yeah, we'll go. And then I was like, hey, let's go. He's like, yeah, we're going to go. And I was like, you know what? Hell with this. I'm going to go. So I went out and I cut down a tree. I brought it home and I was pounding it. And he shows up just randomly. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm pounding this ash tree. He said, that's white ash. And so it was completely useless. It's very it's a whole different type of ash tree. I mean, it was an ash tree. And then he's like, all right, we're going tomorrow. We're going to go. So we went out. And for, we went out for a few years, and every time he's like, okay, you can keep like 30% of the wood, you carry them, you carry the chainsaw, you do all the work, and I'm going to sell the rest of them. And we did that for years. And then one day he carried the chainsaw out. That was pretty cool. But no, I learned so much from him. And I learned how to find ash stands. I learned how to identify quality ash over poor quality ash. And then after that, I once I knew how to find them, I started finding more and more and learning different ways of identifying stands, knowing the right time of year to look for stands, what kind of trees grow around, what kind of land it grows on. A lot of it was subconscious. I remember I was doing a study with the University of Maine, some students, and they took me to an ash stand. Like, we want you to tell us what you think of this ash stand. And we're walking in, and I immediately started walking right. They're like, no, it's over here. I said, no, the ash is over there. And they're like, well, no, we want to take you over here. I said, yeah, but the ash is over there. And I started thinking, well, why am I walking over there? Because I didn't see the trees. I was reading the land, but it was such a subconscious thing that I just realized that, like, the more time you do something, you learn about, like, the plants that grow with it, the way the water flow goes, watershed, what types of trees are growing in different areas. And you can tell, especially with ash, exactly where the good trees are going to be, even if you've never been there, which that was a really cool moment, because I didn't even realize that I knew that until and so I went over to their stand and we looked at them, but the good trees were over there. It was interesting. And every time I get to a stand, I end up, I just wander all around, because you find an ash stand, which is rare. You may only cut 1 or 2 trees out of the whole stand for baskets. They'll be too thin. They'll be too bent. They'll have too many branches. They'll have disease. It's rare to find a stand that has the majority basketry quality trees. But one of the things I realized is that if you harvest your own material and you process your own material, then you know the material in ways that you cannot possibly understand if you're just buying it from somebody else. And you can choose what goes where in your pieces. So every piece, every basket I make, every single piece has a specific thickness. There's so many specific parts to all the pieces that, like, you kind of have to know the material. You can't just have a roll of wood show up and say, I'll just make a basket out of it. I mean, you can, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes I use way thinner material. Actually, I think I would use way thinner material than most weavers, because they would think it has to be thick. I don't even know. But I pull everything together so tight that thicker material wouldn't work. And depending on if it's a double weave there's a lot of boring techniques to it, but so the majority of understanding that material is because I'm harvesting and splitting it down. And the video upstairs has harvesting and splitting in it if you want to see how that's done.
Yeah, and one of the things that we sort of lament in this museum or gallery context is, this is this living, breathing, vibrant material that has a smell and a texture and a sound. And, it's hard to put them under these vitrines, and, you want to touch them. They're so tactile and they're so just felt. And so I wonder if you could just kind of share, like, what it's like to kind of handle the material, what it smells like, just kind of bring that alive for folks who might not be able to encounter it in that way.
Okay. When I pound a tree apart, so I pound the whole outside of the tree, and then you pull the growth years off from the outside in. So you're basically going back in time on the tree. Well, when you first debark it and you start peeling those first few layers off, it has this fruity, like a watermelony smell. It always makes me think of summertime watermelons. But as you get in and you get into the heartwood, it gets this deeper, richer, like a molasses to it. And I love those smells. And as it dries up, it eases off. But when I first harvest in the summer and bring the stuff into the studio and I'm working with it, you get nose blind. But every time I walk back into the studio with fresh material, it's this amazing smell. And then the sweetgrass has another amazing smell. It's called sweetgrass for a reason. It smells just amazing. Yeah, you miss that. You miss that in the show because it's underclass. And even when I box up baskets just to store, when I crack them open, it comes right out at you. Another thing I noticed on my larger pieces, where there are multiple layers of wood put together, is when you come into I'll come into the studio sometimes, and just my motion and me breathing will change the humidity and change the air, and the baskets will start to move and crackle from the presence. And I always thought, it's kind of like it's speaking to me. I thought that was it's been really cool. And it only happens with the giant ones, and it only happens certain times a year, but I always love it. I think it's actually starting to happen right now in the springtime, so that's cool, because I've got a few pieces in the studio right now. But you don't get that in the show because they're under glass. And then touching them, they're harder, stronger, and lighter than you would imagine. And I don't know, there's something about holding them that's really cool, but it's completely inappropriate, you guys. So I'm just saying.
And then there's other material horizons, like you mentioned briefly, the quill work. I wonder if you could kind of share that direction that you also went in. And I remember you saying that that was one of the hardest and most time, just laborious aspects of your practice, and just, patiently inserting those quills to build up an image. But maybe just share about that new direction that you forged along the way.
Yeah, so I had actually talked about craft versus art. And so my thought was, okay, we did traditionally, the Wabanaki people do these birch bark boxes with these geometric like diamonds and stars and things out of quillwork, but it's all these straight lines, and they're pretty, they're beautiful. But I wanted to do something a little bit more elaborate, and so I started doing free form images with this in the same technique. Yeah, I remember what the first animal was, but I quickly learned that the smaller the quill you use, the higher the detail you can get in the image. So I started getting smaller and smaller and smaller quills, which is really hard to see because what you're doing is you're poking the quill through the birch bark and it pokes out the other side, which is great for the first quill. But when there's like 100 quills on there and you're trying to do design in the middle of a design, you look down, all you see is like 1,000 quills, and you're trying to find the one that's poking up in there. And you have to pull it out of that, like that collection of, so yeah, that's the tedium. And then the quill harvest. I don't know if any of you know this, but you get quills from porcupines. And I use the tiny quills. So a lot of people are like, oh, you just throw a blanket on, you pull the blanket off, you got the quills. You know how many times I've seen a porcupine in the wild? Like twice. And those quills are huge. You can't use those. So they're traditionally harvested now through roadkill. So here's the thing though. If you're not traveling that road regularly, you don't pick up the roadkill because you don't know how many days it's been there. It's like, and then porcupines grow hair in the winter to stay warm, and then they shed it in the summer. Well, if you get a porcupine in the winter, there's so much hair, it's not even worth it because it's just not worth it. So I don't even bother. So there's a season for harvesting porcupine quills, and also they tend to move around for some reason when they're harvestable, so they're dead everywhere. But you have to be driving these roads. And guess what I do? I sit in the studio and make baskets. I don't drive those roads. So it's needless to say, I haven't been picking up a lot of porcupines recently, but yeah. And then once you get this dead animal, you pull the quills off, you bring them in, clean them, boil them to disinfect them. And then if I'm going to use natural color, I'll just use them as is. If I'm going to dye them, they get boiled again. And there's all kind, you can paint images with them of scenery. You could do anything you wanted to. You could recreate classical art with the damn things if you wanted to. I do animals because it's part of my culture. It felt right with the basketry. I've done some scenery. But
abstract designs too, right?
Yeah. But so the whole idea behind that was to say, okay, this craft is also high art. I'm painting images, yeah, with craft, but it's free form art. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe let's linger on that for a minute, because you have this just yeah.
What ended up happening was the quill work. The baskets ended up being stands for the quill work, essentially. So that's that's good and bad. So that's sort of because the baskets are they're their own thing, and I don't know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Absolutely. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. Well, Wow, there's so much more we could cover. And we're definitely going to open up to Q&A as well. We'd love to hear from you all, and, have a real conversation. But I wonder, what's next for you, Jeremy? I mean, you are endlessly innovating, as you've shared with us today. And of course, that is not stopping anytime soon. So I wonder if maybe you could share, the journey of this exhibition has been years in the making. I think the first conversation you had with Jamie, my co-curator on this project, was 2021, or I think you all met in 2020. And, it's just really emotional and amazing to be at this, incredible kind of culmination here at the Cantor. But of course, that's not the end for you. There's so much more to come, and sky's the limit. So I wonder what you might want to share about what's really exciting you these days, what directions you're forging now.
Well, I've been really thinking about the material, I guess. I'm toying with the idea of trying to make one of my pieces out of copper. I think that would be interesting. I'm also working on a project where we're going to be producing some bronze sculptures of the work. And I really, to me, that's been like a dream of mine for a very long time, because the work is a natural fiber. It's porous. It can't be outside. And I've always wanted to show my work in a more public, grand scale. And bronze really can do that. But making something so complex and so porous, and it's all these thin materials, like, how do you reproduce that? How do you even get the template for that? So that's been a process. But we're just getting close. So that's going to be cool. I've thought about using precious metals, but at today's prices, they'd have to be these little miniatures, I think I'm going to start with the copper and see how that goes. I'm still exploring the wall works. I'm always exploring basketry as a form and trying to push that. I have a show opening in May, which will have some new stuff in it. Yeah, and then there's other, I don't know. Things pop into my head and just they end up happening kind of organically. So I don't know. I think that like the series of wall works I'm doing now are going to inspire the next thing. And I've definitely been playing with color a lot recently. Early on, I did no color, and then I started doing black and white because your positives and weaves are positives and negatives. So black and white worked perfectly to show off the weave. And then I started doing color, and I really got psyched with that, which I'm still pretty happy with. It's still fun. Yeah, I'm not sure. But before we do the Q&A, I want to answer a question for all of you. Baskets, it's taken me 25 years, maybe a little plus or minus, to be able to make the baskets at the speed I make them now. And I harvest all my own materials. I process all my own materials. It took me years to even learn how to do that. Every single basket is a different size with a different size weaver. And some pieces are multiple layered, some pieces are single layered. So it takes me as long as it takes me to make a basket. And you could say 25 years. So that's the answer to that question.
Good answer. I think there's a mic that might be, yes, Vivian has a mic to pass around, and we invite you all to join the conversation.
I'm curious if you work on multiple baskets at the same time. That's part of your process.
I do. I work on multiple baskets at the same time sometimes. Sometimes I get really excited about this one thing and I want to see it as soon as possible. Because if I'm doing 2 or 3 large pieces, it's like months before they're done. And I start to be, I'm like, have I even done anything? So if I'm doing large pieces, a lot of times I'd rather do them one at a time, because I have a finished piece in a reasonable amount of time. But like I'm working on the show I just mentioned, I have been doing large pieces, and it just seems like every day I'm down there and I feel like I've gotten nowhere, because there's just so much work in each piece, whether it's material prep, doing color. It's yeah, the large pieces are generally done one at a time. But like a small piece, yeah. I don't know, it's both. I think I prefer doing them one at a time. But that doesn't always mean that I get to do that.
The yield you get out of a tree?
The yield, again, that's similar to it depends on the tree and it depends on the size of the work.
You get more than one basket out of it?
Yeah, yeah. But again, some trees are thin. So like there's a tree I have right now that I'm working with. It's remarkable in that it's more flexible than most trees. But it's thin. So I can't use it for ribbing. So I'm using it on a lot of work, but it only works on part of the basket. But since it's thin and flexible, it's actually really conducive to what I'm doing right now. So, yeah. Oh.
Hi, Jeremy. First, we just want to say thank you so much. We're so thrilled to have your show here, and it's been so great to learn from you both. Sorry, I have notes. I just wanted to ask about the centrality of the basket, because it seems to me that the contemporary art world loves it when an artist takes a heritage craft technique or tradition to make a non-utilitarian object. And that is the way that contemporary art often seems to ascribe value. And I think that you were sort of speaking about that at the beginning, right? That you were like, I want to make art, not just craft. But then at the end, you came back around and we're making baskets here that are so incredible. And I would just want to say that I don't ascribe to that value system, right? That says that to make a basket is somehow less than to make a non-utilitarian art form. I think about how Ruth Asawa learned how to make her looped wire from basket weavers in Mexico. But then I also think about what would have art history have thought of her if she never moved into the completely abstract, non-representational form. But then I also think about the pots that are outside are made with her ashes inside the vessels. So at the end of the day, Ruth Asawa wanted to become a utilitarian vessel, and that her family who owns those vessels use them to hold flowers from the family garden. So I was just struck by your continuation of the basket form, of the domestic scale, and what it sort of signals about what is valued in contemporary art. Like, we're not seeing baskets in the Whitney Biennial, for instance, you know, and I think there's something really profound about that. So I would love it if you would speak more about just like the idea of the basket in your work.
Yeah. You know, my attempt at making non-functional baskets, I did a few, but I did them in ways that they were semi-functional. But no, I think for me, yeah, it didn't make any sense to go fully non-functional on them. I mean, they're just, I just wouldn't understand that, you know, culturally. I mean, I've done some free form weaving. Like there's a piece up there that's not a basket, but it's still really based around basketry. I've envisioned like these undulating woven, but I guess the biggest part of, I've taken a traditional art form and I've tried to make it more without taking away its soul. So I try and keep all of the base components, just alter them in a way that makes them relevant in different spaces. And it's not to say that I'll never approach abstract weaving. It's just, I'm not ready for that. And I really feel more comfortable embracing where they came from for now. And even if I do end up doing it, you know, abstract weaving, I'll still have a base basket because I just love that they're usable, they're functional, they're timeless. You think about pottery, you think about pottery from thousands of years ago, from all over the world. It's all that same vessel. And whether it's used or not, it just has an energy to it. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's.
It does, and I don't think anybody's using your baskets.
No, I wouldn't
that-
use them. I wouldn't use them either, but they are functional. They are made to the quality level where they can be used.
Exactly.
That being said, I don't use them.
Yeah.
'Cause, yeah. Don't.
He doesn't let me.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
What are you making another one for?
I'm gonna turn this thing on. No, that's not my, how do I turn this thing on? Oh, it is on, okay. All right.
You talk into it.
Yeah, okay, okay, well, there you go. You know, you guys were talking a little bit about where you're going in the future, and that's something that I've always thought, I've known you a long time. It's something I've always thought about, and I know you've always thought about it. And then as we're sitting here, I'm thinking, well, I remember a long time ago you mentioning the emerald ash borer and how I think at one point you told me you thought in your lifetime you wouldn't have any ash left to weave. So my question then is, does the ash borer coincide with your move to wall pieces, to bronze, to other mediums, or is it just sort of a happy accident maybe?
No, it's definitely motivated. I mean, the ash borer has done so much, like the braided cedar bark in the work. That was finding a way to weave with a different material, and I didn't want to weave with cedar bark straight just because the material quality is such that by braiding it, it strengthens it. It gives you hinge points, and it makes it a stronger, more resilient material. It was also a color choice. But the reason that I decided to start working with cedar bark was to diversify material because I knew that I would be limited on ash. The flat weaves, there's a lot of reasons for the flat weaves. One of them definitely is because they're on all these undulating curves. You could use a different wood to make a flat weave. So I'd explore that. The bronzes, again, yes, but no, because you can't put the ash outside. It's not really great in direct sunlight. It's a natural fiber. You wouldn't put even prints in natural sunlight. I mean, I hope not. I think the idea with the bronzes really is about. I've tried to weave in scale, and the fancy basket is such that you can get too big. There's a point. There's a limit to the size. But with these bronzes, I mean, you can make some pretty cool large sculptures that look just like the baskets, and I just think that's going to be pretty powerful when they're out there. I'm really excited to see those. And then you can play with patina, which is, again, I can go back to color. But I'd love to look up at a version of my basket someday. I think that would be so powerful for me. I don't know about anybody else. So I hope that answers your question.
Hi, I have two questions. My first one is an awe question. I mean, your baskets are so beautiful and perfect, and I wonder whether you ever make any mistakes in your baskets.
We could do a mistake tour of the show if you want. They all have mistakes in them. The trick is hiding them. I mean, there's a saying that no one's perfect. Nothing in the universe is perfect. And the baskets. I mean, for me, I have vague memories of every single basket. I mean, obviously, I don't remember the full completion, but I remember the flaws because I try to be perfect. It's just an attempt. So every piece up there's one part where I might kick myself on the butt when I look at it, and I'm also looking at it through a different set of eyes than any of you. I mean, I've been up close to it. What's interesting about making any work is like I'm up close working on these little spots the whole time. So I don't even see the basket till it's done. Finally, when it's done, I set it up in a spot, I step back, and I get to appreciate it. And all that stuff goes away when you do that, even though it's there, So.
Just to, I was reminded with your baskets within baskets and also your wall pieces. It really reminded me of Ruth Asawa's, why is sculptures within sculptures? And she also does wall pieces or did wall pieces. So have you been inspired by her at all in your work? That's my second question.
While her work is inspiring, no, I wouldn't know how. I mean, I don't even know how she puts them within each other. But she doesn't know how she wouldn't know how I put mine within each other either. I think that's powerful, because I weave, and I'm like, well, how? I was trying to figure it out today. Actually, I was looking at one of her pieces. And I was like, well, how would she do that exactly? But it's great that I don't know. You know what I mean? And some people ask me about some of the double wall work and I just tell them, that's magic. Because you don't need to know, really. It's better if you don't know. Yeah.
Take one final question. Cool.
So I was with a group of 10th graders today, and they were captivated by the video and watching you weave and the sound of it, everything. They were just completely still and absorbed. But they had to leave to catch their bus before the very poignant conclusion of that video. So my question is for them and will that be available for viewing at some point so that these kids can see if they can't come back?
It's an art installation. Yeah, we can figure it out if you get a hold of me. It's not, it's never going to be on the internet, like available. It's actually an art piece. So yeah, but we can figure it out.
A screening. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Special
a screening.
screening.
That might be something. Can we do a screening? Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Well, bring them back. Because if you bring them back, if they go through the show again, they will see things they didn't see the first time.
So true.
And if they watch the video, they'll see things they didn't see well, obviously, but even people who've seen it, if you watch it again, there's other things to see or different, you'll have a different perspective after you've seen the end.
Cute cats.
Yeah, you got to see the cats. No, yeah, it's a solvable problem.
Great. I think that's it. Thank you all so much.